All right. So this evening was supposed to be, I guess what you could sort of almost call episode 1 in a way, of the Truth Talk? Truth Talk, right? Yeah. Truth Talk. Having guests on here to share what they know with all of you through this channel. And Sarah's taking care of that. So I think she has a list of 60 people so far that I've listed as look into. And she's going to contact every one of them. She's been texting with people that left their phone numbers. She's been texting people already and has a handful of people ready to rip on here. But I guess we kind of screwed up. We had a guest come on here this evening from Nova Scotia, and the time she said we said would have put the person at 10 o'clock at night starting. So we're going to reschedule that with that person. Looking forward to talking to him too, because apparently he has an email from a game warden here in British Columbia or Alberta. Jasper, probably Alberta, in regards to what he saw. That's interesting to me. So she's doing it all. I have to admit it to myself, I can't do everything. I can't. And she's going to be lining it all up. The days, the times, the people, getting in contact with them. And she has an email now called truetalk@howtohunt.com. So if you see an email from truetalk@howtohunt.com, it's not spam. It's Sarah trying to get a hold of you to come and talk to the world via me, through me, all right? And that email is also, she was worried, what about people starting to email from all over the place? And I go, don't open them. That's not what it's for. It's not what it's for, you guys. So, and I know there's still going to people are still going to try to email something through there. Don't do it. It'll be ignored. That email is only going to be used for getting a hold of people to come on here. All right? And again, share my story at howtohunt.com is where you get your stuff emailed in normally, okay? So what I'm going to do this evening for a little bit is we are going to hear from the late, great Bobby Short. And the reason I'm inside the house, I got to move this back. All right? Hold on a minute here. The reason I'm in here is because I left my Starlink modem thing on the boat. No internet in the shops. I'm driving me crazy. So I've moved a few items into the house here. Now listen to this. This is from the late, great Bobby Short, all right? Oh, here's a couple things. Okay, top of the page. This entry is titled, Meteor Watchers Encounter Bigfoot. You guys hear me all right? Hold on a minute. Here we go. Wait a sec. All right. A few adjustments in here. Now listen to this. This first entry for this evening is titled, Meteor Watchers Encounter Bigfoot. Sam Updegrove reported that at about 2 a.m. on August 12, 2002, a father and son from Springfield, Missouri, were standing in the rural darkness next to their parked car on a gravel road at the Greene and Christian County line. They had made this nocturnal journey in hopes of watching the celestial fireworks of the annual Perseid meteor shower. Instead, they encountered a Bigfoot who was watching the meteor shower. Now listen to this. Forestry employee talks is the header of these entries. U.S. Forestry employee Dave Rodden, R-O-D-E-N, had several different encounters. He wrote the following, quote, although I tell the stories occasionally, working in these somewhat remote locations, Bigfoot opportunities seem to crop up every time I turned my head. Incident number 1. We were surveying a timber access road about 5 miles up the Bluff Creek Road. At that time, a dirt road ran alongside above the creek for a ways. From there, we hiked into the area to be timbered and surveyed out to the main road to avoid advance bidder inquiries. Hiking in one morning in July 1974, we noticed how quiet it was. Usually there are birds and other animal sounds. I had a German Shepherd, and my friend had his husky with him. Both dogs stayed right under our feet and weren't running and playing as they normally did. We sat down by a deer trail to rest. Between my friend and me, we noticed a footprint in the dust of the trail. We followed the tracks to the area where we had been working the day before. We followed the tracks for about 200 feet, and at that point they broke over the top of the ridge into some fairly thick undergrowth. While standing there trying to decide if we should follow the tracks any further, we heard a blood-curdling scream, which answered our question for us. The tracks were measured at 16.5 inches long, and the stride was measured at just over 6 feet heel to toe. We took pictures of the tracks and included a wad of hair we found hanging on a sharp limb about 6 feet off the ground, and mailed them to our officer in Denver, Colorado. We were afraid to go back out there, but our office told us we could carry guns if we wanted. We decided against that, but did manage to go back out and collect the samples we eventually mailed to the office. Wow. How many times the office hear about this shit, right? Incident number 2. I was living in Sequoia National Park, staying in one of the Park Service cabins in November 1970. I was alone in my cabin as the fire season was pretty much over. And while lying on my cot one night, I see the silhouette of a large head and shoulders pass my window and wondered who was outside. It dawned on me the window was 6 feet above the ground. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. No doubt. Incident number 3, also the Sequoia National Forest. Our contractor sent his backhoe operator and a laborer up to the borrow pit to bring back the backhoe down to the project site. The borrow pit is a location away from the road where additional soil may be excavated for the road work we were doing. In short time, the truck they were in came running down the road. These 2 men walked up to my boss and asked if there had been any sightings of Bigfoot in the area. It seemed that when they arrived at the pit, they noticed large footprints all around the heavy equipment. They followed the prints over to the steep bluff, and there, standing at top of the bluff, they saw a large, hairy creature, obviously upset they were there. They said the creature was hitting the ground and screaming to the point they decided they had better leave. Wow. I also was privy to a sighting just outside of Hayfork, California, while with a surveying crew working at Peanut, a tiny unincorporated community in Trinity County, California, located on Highway 3 south of Hayfork but north of Highway 36. I was staying in the real nice Forest Service barracks facility in Hayfork. I had to make a trip that day, so did not go out to the field. I was in a mess hall making a late breakfast when 3 Forest Service types came in. One was obviously distressed. Seeing the other 2 were trying to calm him down, I guess, as they told the story. This person was marking trees for removal by a timber contractor and had a funny feeling all morning that something was following him. He finally doubled back along his own trail to see. He said as he walked up to a large tree, a giant creature, covered with hair, stepped right in front of him. He said he was face to face with the Bigfoot. Well, I guess this guy ran off the hill at a pretty good clip, and it took a while to stop him. He said he would never go back out there, and if my recollection is correct, they brought in a helicopter to take him down the hill. This happened in February or March of 1973, and that's the Hayfork story. That pretty much sums things up. Not my imagination, just the way things happen. Take these stories for what they're worth. Dave Rodden, U.S. Forestry, Monday, December 31st, 2001. There you go. A brave, honest forestry worker. Here's another one. This is titled Wandering Off Behavior. Washington State field investigator Randy Trusty took a report in 1989 that involved 4 men camping in Cowlitz County, Washington. A Bigfoot walked out of the creek bed right by their camp. Not knowing what else to do, one of the men quickly climbed a tree. One man picked up and grabbed onto a large piece of beaver chew. Another ran. The The last one of the four picked up a fist-sized rock and threw it at the surprised Sasquatch, hitting its center chest. With no particular alarm, the creature turned and walked off into the brush, a commonly reported behavior. He's lucky he didn't catch a rock right in the head, right? From what we know now. Excuse me. The fellow with the piece of beaver chew was shocked, frozen in position. He had the branch stick held up, ready to hit whatever came at him. At that point, a rock about the size of a basketball came flying out of the bush and hit the beaver chew so hard it almost broke the guy's wrist. In the words of the informant, quote, "It was as fast as a Nolan Ryan fastball," end quote. This is not the behavior of a passive Bigfoot. It was aggression, pure and simple. I'd say it was probably retaliation by the sounds of shit. Trusty interviewed 3 of the 4 men. The 4th refused to comment, but was obviously very frightened about what had happened. Interestingly, the encounter with the 4 campers happened less than 400 yards from where Rand Trusty had his first sighting in 1984. In 1999, I took a report of tracks found deeply impressed in the river mud along the Kiseralik River, Kiseralik River, in remote Kwethluk, Kwethluk, which is in the Bethel census area of Alaska. Tracks are found in any number of places in North America, some showing 5 toes, but others with missing digits. Traversing mountain terrain barefooted is surely hazardous. I'm surprised we don't see more defective foot tracks than we do. And on that note, the next entry is Sasquatch with 3 toes reported. That's got my interest too, not only because hundreds of people have reported, but a close friend of mine has found 3-toed tracks that were like 18 or 20 inches long here in BC. And it scared the shit out of them, and I think it accompanied the smell and everything, the whole gamut, right? That was my friend that sat on the front of his hunting cabin porch and talked to me. Sasquatch with 3 toes reported. Most of the time, the reports I receive of tracks usually cite 5 toes. I've included this report from Kelso Lake, Bonner County, Idaho, because it deviates from the norm. This right foot had only 3 toes, and according to the witness, the 2 smaller digits were missing. It makes sense that anything barefooted trying to negotiate the forest floor, slippery and sharp rocky terrain, and huge areas of deadfall are going to lose digits, or in some fashion incur foot trauma. Here's the picture. Hope this works. Should. And there is the picture of the 3-toed print. What a great book. The late Tom Akron, so heavily involved in this field at one time, was once a highly visible advocate for the existence of Bigfoot. The other police officers he worked with knew it. As a consequence, Captain Akron had many a door open to him. It was Akron who brought this 3-toe discovery to my attention. The smaller toes looked shaved off, perhaps from an accident. Quote, "A North Idaho sawmill builder said he and his son found a giant footprint of a Sasquatch at the end of May 1997 while bear hunting in the northern hills of the Idaho Panhandle, high in the timber country. We walked into a clear cut, and my 13-year-old son stopped, looked down, and said, 'Dad, is this a Bigfoot track?' When your boy says something like that, you got to go and take a look." Sure enough, there it was. 14 inches by 7-inch depression in the mud on a slope a few feet above a logging road. It was shaped like a giant human foot, but it only had 3 toes. All I could do was sit there in awe. It was something, and it was shocking. The witness returned with a friend who videotaped him making the plaster mold of the footprint. As shown in the photograph, the track was cast. Photographs of the cast were made public on Idaho television and have been published in several newspapers in Idaho. The witness is convinced the footprint was authentic, as he had heard stories from an uncle 30 years earlier who had told him of footprints in the snow near Mount Rainier. Sasquatch with bunions and misshapen toes. Randy Stradley sent in this story in 2006. The location was Oregon House, Yuba County, California. Not only did this case mention bunions and misshapen toes, it cites an incident where lightning struck. It apparently terrorized the Sasquatch, causing it to scream and run towards the lake, slipping and falling down. Lots of information here. It's a great read. Excuse me. All right, here we go. Quote, this happened in September of 1981 in the Sierra Nevada mountains, north central California. My family was camping at a man-made reservoir/recreation area called Collins Lake, which is about 30 miles west of Grass Valley and Nevada City, as the crow flies. At the south end of the lake, there was an undeveloped camping area with nothing but outhouses as amenities, and only a few other campers were staying out there that weekend. That night around 9, we got hit by a summer lightning storm, a little rain and lots of thunder, and the lightning seemed to be hitting pretty close by. Most of the campers around us were still sitting by their fires, and suddenly we all saw and heard a huge bolt of lightning hit across the lake from us, and right then, a huge, horrible scream filled the night. It sounded only vaguely human in tone, but it definitely seemed to be a scream of terror in response to the lightning. The entire campground fell silent, and as you might expect, various people wandered over to ask if we heard the scream. I would guess there were 20 people total in the area, and everyone heard it and was terrified by it. My dad decided that we'd get up as soon as the sun was up the following morning and hike over to the other side of the lake to investigate. So at around 6:30 in the morning, we all got up, started toward the east side of the lake. It was about a mile total, maybe a little further, to leave the campsite and cross the dam between the lake and the reservoir before we found the tree that had apparently been struck by the lightning bolt. The tree was at the very edge of the tree line, about 30 feet from the water. Right in the same area, we found 2 sets of tracks coming out of the trees and leading down to the water's edge. They looked stereotypical Bigfoot tracks. Though one set was much smaller than the other, the smaller tracks were about the size of my dad's size 12 shoes. The large ones were much larger, longer by about 6 inches and wider. The bigger set of tracks seemed to be almost deformed, with huge bunions and somewhat misshapen toes. The tracks were pristine, captured perfectly in the damp sand. Down by the water's edge, it appeared that one of the creatures had slipped and fallen into the shallow water. The right footprint here dug into the sand about 8 inches and left a long slip mark, maybe 3 feet long or more. And next to these tracks, there was also a big right handprint evident in the sand where we assumed the creature caught itself as it fell. My entire family, mom and dad, my 2 older brothers, and me witnessed this, but we had no way of documenting what we'd found. We were actually homeless at the time, not just recreational camping, so we had very little money, no real resources to speak of, no camera, no way to run out and buy any plaster of Paris to make a cast. We just walked around the tracks and marveled at them for about a half an hour before we decided to hike back to the truck and move on. My brother Chad, second oldest of the siblings, who was at the time an Army Ranger stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, told our other brother that he saw Bigfoot cross the road in front of his truck somewhere in the Smoky Mountains very late at night. That was from Shauna Gore. Huh. It kind of makes you feel kind of sad when you hear about the homeless people, right? It makes me sad. There's no reason for it. Another topic. Sorry. This next entry is titled Bigfoot Hiding Tracks, ? At some point, I recall discussions about the possibility of Sasquatch hiding their tracks. Do they or don't they? I don't think we can make any kind of blanket statement that includes all living Sasquatch making a life choice to hide their tracks. There are simply too many footprint collections that indicate otherwise. One report will surface once in a while, trend briefly, and then it sort of fades away. Occasionally, newbies will jump on the suggestion that Bigfoot hides his tracks. but that isn't what the data shows. In 30 years, I received only one such report out of thousands. Thousands. The report came from Todd C. Homer, who had at one time interviewed a Bannock Native American from Fort Hall, Bannock County, Idaho. People of Indian extract often have theories of their own about the Sasquatch and how they see them. Some are accurate, some are folklore. Their views are not always the popular viewpoint. In the interview, the Bannock gentleman told Homer he had seen Bigfoot on 3 separate occasions on the Eel River, Trinity Forks, and the Snake River. The interesting part of his story about Bigfoot hiding their tracks, he said, quote, "I saw one in the afternoon on a dirt path below me in a small canyon. The Bigfoot was dragging a sagebrush to erase his tracks and conceal his footprints. They will also step on stones when they can in order to avoid making tracks. I don't argue this is untrue, but not all Sasquatches engage in this behavior. There are too many of them who do leave tracks for this to be a universal behavior. It is too difficult to imagine that as deep as most Bigfoot tracks are impressed into soil or snow, that dragging a piece of sagebrush would obliterate tracks. This may be a visual misinterpretation." The witness also theorized that they bury their dead in water, weighted down in rivers and ponds with heavy stones. Interesting theory. T.C. Homer. Next entry is missing digits. A quad rider, Alfred, wrote to say that he was riding around in the snow at the end of Memaloose Road in Clackamas County, Oregon in 2009 when he found tracks in the snow that had 5-foot stride. Diane Stocking investigated the tracks, but it was difficult to make a length determination because the tracks had been lightly snowed over and appeared to have the digits between the big toe and the little toe missing in the left track. Sasquatch with large girth. In 1983, Courtney Crum of Kitwencool, British Columbia, reported a 7-foot Sasquatch watching her and her 2 brothers near the family's smokehouse. It was trying to hide itself behind a giant cottonwood tree, but she said there was no way to hide its girth. Her grandmother told her it's a Bigfoot, like it was no big deal. So that's the way she viewed it as she grew up and finally reported the sighting. Another report came on November 17th of 2001 concerning a truck driver on a precarious road in the mountains of Coeur d'Alene, Kootenai County, Idaho. He was driving along and decided to take a break, park his vehicle, and then he got out to stretch his legs. He walked over the road's embankment, turned around to look down the road, and there he saw a Bigfoot hurriedly making its way towards him. The creature came fairly close, then turned, went over the embankment and into the densely forested trees. Frightened, the informant left but told me he continues to tell the story to anyone who will listen. I'll bet he does. Craig Woolheater filed a roadside sighting he had while traveling by car from New Orleans to Dallas, Texas. No behavior was mentioned in his report. His sighting occurred in Rapids Parish, Alexandria, Louisiana, in 1994. Man, so many people dug so deep so long ago, right? Not only Bobby Short, but many others. So many people. The Dana Jacqueline story. One of the creepier stories I've read appeared in a number of Alaskan newspapers. Not only creepy, the story sketched a picture of Sasquatch behavior that was totally caring. Nevertheless, the message was clear. The story surrounds a refrigeration mechanic named Dana Jacqueline, Jacqueline, Jacallen, of Kodiak, Alaska, who related a situation that occurred in and around Wrangell and the Etolin Islands in Alaska. Dana Jacqueline had several different encounters with what the Alaskan natives call hairy man, and in each he was impressed by their behavior that they wanted to be left alone. His fascination with the creature goes back to a cold morning in 1979 on the remote island of Etolin. Etolin?
Etolin, which sits west of Wrangell Island. It is beyond scary, dark, thick wilderness. He and his hunting partner had hopes of harvesting a fat deer they knew inhabited the alpine meadow at the rear of the fjord. In Jacqueline's words, hold on a minute. I was kind of hoping it was going to be Kodiak for a minute there. I've been to Kodiak and Afghanic Island hunting. Pretty remote places. We arrived by boat in the inlet just before dark in the late fall. My partner did not trust the anchorage or the weather, so we opted to stay on the boat while I climbed up to where we knew the deer would be spending the night. I found a bench and folded myself up into a large piece of plastic tarp. In my sleeping bag, on a small outcropping about 8 feet off a well-worn trail. 8 feet off the trail. No thanks. Never. The other hunter was to meet me at this spot before dawn in the morning, and we knew we would bag some deer easily in the nearby meadow, just after it got light enough to shoot. We had seen deer here several times before, but never took the advantage. And just before I went to sleep, I remembered seeing the mast light on the boat in the inlet and imagining the boom hung with our limit of deer. I awakened before dawn. It was around 1 o'clock. My sleeping bag was jerked out from under me instantly like a magician does with the tablecloth and the glass trick. I awoke the moment it happened. Curled into a fetal position, freezing my fanny, I laid there for a few seconds trying to figure out what happened. I figured something had either happened to the boat, or my pal somehow spotted a trove of fat deer. I sat up, pulled on my boots, and looked for my partner to explain what was going on. I was still not fully awake, but for fear of scaring the deer, I refrained from calling to my friend. It had snowed almost an inch since I went to sleep, and peering over the ledge, I could see people tracks in the snow leading up the hill toward the meadow. I grabbed my rifle and slogged down the trail, peering at the ground in the dark and wondering how and why my somewhat elderly companion had chosen this unusual method of rousing me from the sack. I was stepping in the footprints in the snow. They were dark and easy to see, and I was starting to think that my partner had not been the one to zip my sleeping bag out from underneath me. And then realization struck me, and I was gripped with fear. The tracks I was so carefully stepping in were not exactly human. They were the imprints of bare feet, but almost twice the size of my own size 10 boots. I could hear nothing except the snowflakes falling gently to the ground, and every hair on my body was erect, sensing the air for the obvious logical solution. This is a very carefully planned prank, and all I need is to lose my control and end up hurting someone. I double-checked the safety on the rifle and determined that this joke was going to be on them. Cool as a cucumber, I walked a few steps up the hill where I would be able to see the crest. There was a large hemlock tree there, and I decided to climb up to it and wait out the pranksters who were trying to scare me out of my wits. Checking the sky, I noticed that within a few minutes, the clouds would reveal the full moon, thereby providing me with enough light to see what was going on. I took a few more steps, marveling at the perfection these guys had achieved with the footprints. Somebody's about to get a surprise, right? Suddenly, I knew it was no joke. I felt an unmistakable sense of warning, as clearly as if someone had spoken. It wasn't logic, it wasn't fear. I stopped and looked up, and 15 feet away, one hand on his hip, the other gripping a branch of the hemlock that was just above my head, was the biggest, hairiest guy on two legs I ever want to see. Without thinking, I started to thumb the safety off my rifle. He turned his head to stare at me straight in the eyes. His teeth were showing, but it was not a snarl or a grin. I want to say it was a knowing smile. I knew it could place a kill shot, but I also knew it would be wrong, even criminal. He was saying to me, with all the power of the Spirit, leave me alone. And one instant he was there, and the next he turned and fled silently into the woods. He was like a mist in the forest, wanting to be left alone. That's a bit of a creepy description of how he was looking at him, with a knowing. I want to say it was a knowing smile. Ooh, there's some confidence, right? Jacqueline said he recalled little as he ran and stumbled down the hill to the beach, hollering all the way. His partner, who was waiting on the beach, insisted he made the trip down in half the usual time. After daylight, the two retraced Jacqueline's steps up the hillside, and the footprints he followed earlier measured 17 inches long and 5 or 6 inches wide. The impressions left in the mossy ground convinced them that the creature weighed 600 to 800 pounds. When they measured from the ground to the hemlock branch the creature had grasped onto, they found the distance was 9.5 feet. The hairy man was 7.5 to 8 feet tall. The hairy man was equally as large but more lean. He had long, silky hair. On his arms, the hair was a good 6 inches long. He walked erect, and he made no sound. His movement was graceful. I couldn't see his face too well, but it seemed like his skin was leathery. His eyes were dark and intelligent. A short time after the encounter, Jacqueline said the Wrangell Sentinel carried a photograph taken from the air of the tracks of a two-legged creature in the deep snows of the mountain. Jacqueline was raised on a homestead in the Talkeetna Mountains and has spent his share of time in the Alaskan bush. I spent enough time in the woods to know the difference between when something is scaring me and I'm scaring myself. And there is no question in my mind about what I saw. And this is the part where the Sasquatch behavior gets interesting. Twice more during the 5 years he trapped for a living, he became convinced the creatures were nearby and letting him know he was not welcome. A year and a half after the first incident, Jacqueline set up 40 to 50 traps in a new area rich with mink sign, only to come back the next day to find the traps had all been sprung. Thinking his adversary was maybe a crafty wolf, Jacqueline moved some and reset the others. When he returned again the next spring, there was a stick left in one of the sprung traps. Clearly not something expected of a wolf. He reset them again. Returning the third day, all his traps were gone. As he walked along the trail pondering the mystery, he found himself following in what he thought were... Hold on. His own tracks. But the stride was 1.5 Jacqueline's usual stride, and they left a deep impression in the moss. It was then he realized he was being given another warning not to be in the area. Quote, as I launched the skiff, I heard a rattling down on the water's edge. I looked, and the traps were piled by the skiff, Jacqueline said. He knew the area well and knew there were no other people in the area, and in spite of the signs, the area would provide a good many furs. I pulled out of the creek, and I didn't disturb any other places in that area, he said. And sometime later, in another remote spot on the island, Jacqueline was in the process of putting together a cedar shake shed as a place to store his gear. He had felled a hefty cedar and was hand-splitting shakes from it when his dog began acting strangely. Henry wasn't afraid of anything, not even a wolf. Most dogs are terrified of even the smell of a wolf, he said. But this time, the usually unruffled dog started to whine and crawled on his belly to the skiff. He climbed into the skiff without permission, something he had not been trained never to do, and hunkered down under a seat. Jacqueline at first dragged Henry out, but the dog continued to act terrified. That really made Jacqueline think. He took a rifle and walked in a 100-foot circle. Then I stopped and I knew I wasn't alone in the woods. I got in the skiff and left. Motoring back later, we found a huge cedar tree he'd been working on, had been carried to the bank and dumped into the cove. Startled, and without going ashore, he turned the skiff around and left. I didn't want to give any indication that I would go against their will. What an amazing story, chock full of Sasquatch-type conduct, lots of silent messaging going on there that Jacqueline didn't always catch. That'd be pretty creepy. I'm trying to picture that happening to me trapping, right? My trapping days. But they didn't seem to mind me. Luckily. Circling a tent in the dark of night, said thousands. In June of 1986, Richard Saunders, Jerry and Paul Elliott were in their tents in an area known to the locals as Sam's Old Bottom in Vernon Parish, Louisiana. As far as the crow flies, not far from Leesville. They were awakened to heavy footfalls walking or circling around outside their tent and described seeing an approximate 6-foot-tall Bigfoot in their campsite. At no time did the creature make any moves toward us or to cause us any harm, they told me. The creature looked at them for a few brief seconds, then turned and went off into the woods. What the men remembered most about the encounter was the smell. They saw little in the way of description because it was dark, and at the time I sent the report to Ken Marvel, who was a member of the TBRC, June 29th, 2001, but I never heard back or what came of his investigation. Huh. It's hard to quit reading, right? I love reading this. Love reading it. Let's read this one more. The Mike Woolley story. Keechee, DeSoto County, Louisiana. Mike Woolley's encounter. Mike Woolley, Wooley. Mike Woolley's encounter with several Bigfoot was recorded at the TBRC Bigfoot Conference in Tyler, Texas in October 2010. Woolley, an avid deer hunter, said that he saw a number of Bigfoot in the woods which made him exceedingly uncomfortable. No doubt. He didn't know what they were in the beginning. In fact, he kept silent for more than 20 years because of the ridicule that comes to most people who discuss Bigfoot openly. So bizarre. During the deer season of 1981, Woolley went down an old logging road that went through a deer preserve and dead-ended. It was there that he set up his deer stand, and here's where his story gets really interesting. While Woolley was sitting high up in the deer stand, a doe came out of the dense brush and laid down at the foot of Woolley's deer stand, actually touching the ladder that went up the deer stand high up in the tree. The little doe was panting, foaming at the mouth. Woolley described her appearance as having been run hard or chased through the timber by what he thought was a big buck or a bear or something. But just then, Woolley saw out of his peripheral vision, about 20 yards to his right, a big, black, tall, gorilla-looking thing, ducked behind a large tree. The witness thought it was looking right at him. At first, Woolley thought it was someone in a suit playing a joke on him, so he yells at this thing, chewing it out, telling it that this ain't no joke. Get out of here, I'll take your head off. But he got no reaction. Apparently, the Sasquatch didn't understand English, nor did he appear to understand the tone of Woolley's threatening voice. The dark Bigfoot continued to look him up and down, more or less checking Woolley out for what seemed like a lengthy 15 minutes. Woolley did his best to reason what this thing was and how it was able to come out of the thicket like it did, as dense as the thicket was. Woolley described the Sasquatch as evil-eyed and overall sinister-looking about it. It was not a look of welcome. And at that point, he lifted his rifle up and took a hard look through the rifle's scope at the face of the creature and knew instantly, hey, this is really something. This is the real deal, and right here I've got a problem. Woolley described, as so many witnesses in my data have, that when he raised the rifle, his rifle, the Sasquatch growled at him, and it was a really horrible growl. The creature's expression showed intense anger. Woolley described the creature as antsy agitated. He got froggy on me, and when he growled, I got nervous, real nervous. About that time, a real shrill whistle came from about 100 yards off in the woods. The creature heard the whistle, turned his head, and looked in the direction toward the whistler, and then replied to the whistle in the same manner as the other, and in the same tone. The Sasquatch looked back at Wooly. Crazy. The Sasquatch looked back at Wooly, grinned, or showed his teeth, but when he did, the informant climbed down that 10-foot deer stand and took off running. Wooly described the creature giving chase, flanking him in the woods about 20 yards off to the left. In his retreat back to his vehicle, the informant said his legs felt like lead, and he felt he wasn't going to make it back to his truck, but he ran for all he was worth. When he got to his truck, he turned, aimed, and fired a shot, thinking it would buy him some time in order to get the door unlocked and get inside. The shot almost hit the Sasquatch in the head. The bullet hit a tree 3 feet in front of the Bigfoot's head, which he described as 7 feet tall, 450 to 500 pounds, great shape, muscular build. He got in the truck, started the engine, and took off driving. Looking in his rear view mirror, plain as day, here came the second Sasquatch running behind his truck. Willie figured the manner of the whistle was a signal between the two that somehow meant the Bigfoot had themselves a situation, and Wooly was it. At that point, the informant realized the two Bigfoot had both been trailing him all the way back to his vehicle. Interesting behavior. The informant went into a kind of a depression after that encounter and never hunted that place again. He moved to another hunting area 6 or 7 miles away, and there he had half a dozen sightings or more. From the height of his deer stand, he observed the Sasquatch under trees, on their bellies, covertly watching their quarry, patiently waiting on roosting turkeys. Then, in an instant, the Bigfoot would explode on them, successfully hunting turkeys that way. Whoa. Well, he had a great deal of experience with the Sasquatch. He observed families with small babies and some adults that were up to 8 feet tall. He feels that when hunting in the woods, he was trespassing in their home turf, so to speak. He felt there are all manner of Bigfoot personalities, some harmless, some thugs. You never know what you're going to get, and coincidentally, that is exactly what the data tends to show. Wooly concluded his interview by saying, "If you encounter a Bigfoot, leave quietly. Don't point your weapon at them because they are awesome and can rip a person in two, just as a tiger can rip your face off in one swat." Whew. No doubt. Seems they all know what a gun is, right? No doubt at this stage of the game for all of us in this big ride, later on in life compared to all these people reporting back in the 60s, 50s, 70s. They know what a gun is. All right, now I don't know why that light was flickering. I haven't a clue what's going on. But now it's steady. But it was flickering earlier. I don't get it. But whatever. Here we go. Carrying on. I got to read this next entry. Sasquatch. Oh, peering. I thought I said peeing. Sasquatch peering into a car. Woody A. is a native Alaskan. By tradition, he feeds his family by hunting and fishing. He started hunting at the tender age of 5. And when he's not in the woods hunting, Woody carves sacred masks for tribal ceremonies and for tourists. Only the hunting puts food on the table. The family diet consists mostly of salmon and deer meat. With winter closing in soon, Woody took his sister and went over in the forest of Prince of Wales Island hunting. They were on the island a full week when it happened. The two were going to camp on the high mountain ridge, but the weather increasingly got nasty. It rained so hard they couldn't keep a fire going. They decided to drive down to Eagle's Nest Campground, but it was closed for the winter. The campground is situated near Control Creek and Balls Lake within the Tongass National Forest, which covers nearly 17 million acres in southeast Alaska and is the largest forest in the National Forest System. It was a hard rain that continued mercilessly. So they pulled into the campground, tilted the seats back in the car, and decided to sleep there inside the car for the night. Woody tried to settle in for the night, but increasingly felt like something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As a hunter, Woody was high alert mode. The night, he said, was just too quiet, but finally the rain stopped. Suddenly he opened his eyes and he couldn't believe what he saw. Fear, he said, grabbed him in the chest. The Sasquatch was peering in the car window at him. Seeing something that big and that powerful on its enormous shoulders could have reached through the window easily if it had wanted to, but it didn't. Anderson said he felt a fight or flight kind of fear race through his body. I'm out in the woods so often that I knew instantly what I was seeing, you know. It's a life-changing experience. I sat up and hollered. It was a Bigfoot, plain as day. It turned to walk back into the tree line and was out of sight. There must be something about parked vehicles and campers that work on the curious side of the Sasquatch. The behavior of peering into vehicles, trailers, and RVs ranks right up there in high numbers of reports, probably second or third to road crossings and sightings from a distance. Right? Man, I remember one time, every time I read about peering into the car thing, it takes me back to when I was about 24 years old, I think. And I had stopped in Yubo on Couch and Lake, had a few beers, some loggers there, some buddies, and I was going to go on through the back roads, logging roads, to get to Bamfield, where I was doing this job. And it's pissing rain, and I had a new alternator put on in Yubo on the side of Couch and Lake, and they wired it wrong. And I made it about halfway there. I lost all power to my truck right near, now they look back, it was probably near the Carmana. Net Carmana on another back side road that we take, the Klanawa shortcut, which is, back then, nobody drove around there. And I was stuck on a bridge on a creek, pissing rain, in my old 73 Ford half-ton 4x4. And very, very well aware of what was running around there. I remember being really stressed out. I was going to have to, and I had a rifle with me, always. And I was going to have to sit in my truck in the pitch black and for the whole night, and hopefully somebody might come along or just start hiking out of there. And sure enough, somebody was banging on the window. The truck woke me up, and now I look back, it was obviously some shake block poachers. So I think it was probably 3 a.m, and they had I was blocking the road, and they had a big flat deck with rails on it. They had shake blocks in it, and there's only one person that's going to be packing shake blocks at 3 a.m. That's a poacher. But anyway, they gave me a jump. And I knew, because my alternator was dead, I knew I couldn't have any electricity on it. It would kill my truck. And off they went. My only chance to get my truck going. And I literally, while it was raining, I had my window rolled down on my pickup, pitch black, and I'm looking out at the sky, I could just see the timber on both sides of the logging road looking up. Pitch black, and I drove so slow. And that's how I kept my truck on the road, by looking up between the trees and judging the distance. I'll never forget that. And then eventually it slowly was starting to get light out, and I could start to see a little better. And I ended up driving all the way back to Yubo, got my truck alternator rewired. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have a clue. And then turned around and headed all the way back to Banfield again. But it's funny. Every single time I hear of somebody sleeping in their vehicle, having to be in their vehicle and getting peeked in the window at, just takes me back to that night. So I was like, oh God, here we go. Here we go. I remember that was all I was thinking. Here we go. Now, I'm going to read one more, and then that's it. And then tomorrow it's back to the coast. Bigfoot advances on 3 hunters. At the same time as the Woody Anderson story reached me, another sighting was reported on Kuyu Island, not far from Prince of Wales Island in Alaska. An email came in from 3 men who had hunted 2 miles inland off Seclusion Harbor on Kuyu Island. The email was hard to figure out, and it would be nearly 4 weeks later that I was able to reach the men by telephone. If I understood correctly, they had bagged a huge buck and were heading down this draw to field dress it and carry it out in sections. The daylight was growing dim. As they cleared away the foliage to get to the deer, they were confronted by a humongous Bigfoot, which brazenly sprang out in front of the 3 men, blocking the last few yards to the kill. They said they didn't smell him or even anticipate an encounter of this magnitude. It so terrified the men that one of them told me he could not get his voice to work. Quote, I was unable to speak or articulate a full sentence. My mouth was dry. All I could muster was a long stare at this thing. The Bigfoot apparently made no noise other than the witnesses all said that they could hear it breathing rather rapidly, its nostrils flaring with each breath. The sound of its breath was hollow and deep. Morris, the older of the three men, raised his rifle and fired into the air. The informant said the report of the rifle so shocked the Bigfoot that it jumped backwards and fell down, but righted itself immediately. Then in a flash it came forward, lunging at them again, stumbling forward from a few yards away. Afraid there was a bit of momentary chaos as they yelled back and forth at each other, wondering what they should do. The men feared for their lives as the Bigfoot advanced toward the men. One of the men fired, but the Bigfoot showed little reaction. At the same time, hunter number 2 fired directly at the creature, and it fell down, but got up, again making deep guttural groaning sounds. Its mouth open, and it was drooling blood, he said. They thought that it was mortally wounded. The Bigfoot advanced again towards them, with arms waving over its head. 2 men fired almost simultaneously, striking the Bigfoot in the upper body. The creature went down, and with it, the peril they felt of being killed. They measured it at nearly 10 feet tall and guessed its weight at close to 1,000 pounds of pure muscle, mostly shoulders, with reddish-brown hair and a face that was so distorted that it didn't seem real to them. It was ghostly. The eyes were the same size as ours, tiny for the size of his big face. The hooked nose, too big for the face, and ruddy, pock-marked skin was the same color as mine, said one of the hunters. His beard was long and strawberry-colored with gray streaking. In the chaos, their only thought was the very real threat of being killed. Scared silly, the 3 hunters retrieved the buck and lit out of there as fast as they could. I asked each of them separately what they thought the behavior of this Bigfoot was all about. The consensus was that its behavior was almost assuredly a challenge for who would win that big buck. One of them said, he wanted it pretty bad, but our winter would be pretty bleak without the meat. The behavior is interesting in that I don't have another confrontation exactly like this one, where the Sasquatch actually charges 3 men. But it resembles the Mike Woolley case, where he ran and the Sasquatch pursued him, even as the vehicle left the area. I was assured that each of the 3 men believed they were going to die that day. It was him or us. Once again, this is not the behavior of a just curious passive Bigfoot. In many hunting excursions to the woods behind Seclusion Harbor, this was the first time they encountered a Sasquatch, and it is hard to decipher what the motivation might have been for the described behavior. Why didn't the Sasquatch simply gather up the deer and be off with it? I can't help but wonder why he chose to block access to the deer kill when he was outnumbered 3-1. Seclusion Harbor is remote. Perhaps the Bigfoot was unfamiliar with hunters, rifles, and the end results of challenging hunters. The sad thing is, these are behaviors we may never understand. Wow, there we go. There's another one. Bobby Sure, she recorded more than a handful of alleged deaths to these people by humans, didn't she? Remember that guy with the bow and arrow? And a few others with the rifles. I wonder how many of the people that we read from Bobby's books, her reports, I wonder how many of these people follow the channel. I wonder. And if they do, if they ever chime in, or they chimed in the past or emailed me, I don't know. But anyway, there you go. It's always good to hear from the late, great Bobby Short, isn't it? She's still talking. She's still getting heard. That's pretty cool, considering how many people tried to stop her and sabotage her along the way, right? We all know who that was. But anyway, time to go to bed. And I'm not sure Sarah she's got a whole bunch of people waiting to get on here. And I have been in contact with another friend of ours here I can't wait to talk to. And that's going to happen fairly quick as well. And I'll probably be doing a bunch of these guest appearances while I'm on the boat too. So it should be interesting. I can't wait to hear put some faces and voices to the text, right? And see what people want you to learn from them. So share my story at howtohunt.com. That's where you email. When you want to email me, that's where you email. And Truth Talk, if that's in your inbox, it's Sarah. It's not spam. All right? Back later.